Picture this, a vintage and provocative photo of a couple, one in the chair mid-shave, the other straddling them. Is this what you would imagine? This is actually a photo of Katie Lang and Cindy Crawford. There's a photo of them on the cover of Vanity Fair, and then there's this one, which is the centerfold. This picture does a great job of demonstrating Butch and Femme couple, because Katie Lang herself, the one in the chair, identifies as a Butch lesbian. The Butch and Femme identities came out in the late 1940s and have been a staple in the lesbian community since then. As a Butch lesbian with a Femme partner, I know firsthand what these identities mean, at least on a personal level. I also have studied Butch or lesbian communities in Germany, but wanted to delve more in the identities in America. I also have a women's and gender studies minor from another institution, so I'm well versed in the lingo. Today I want to look at Butch and Femme identities. Specifically, what does Butch and Femme mean? How has the meaning changed over time? And what is the cause for this? Because this kind of information isn't spread through mainstream media, this would be a great opportunity to have a deeper understanding of the lesbian community and unlearn prejudices and more about a culture different from your own. So first, let's just define Butch and Femme. A Butch is a lesbian that performs masculinity for the gaze of another lesbian. According to them, a website on LGBT culture, Butches reject traditional gender roles by performing masculinity. This is a picture of Leslie Feinberg, a famous Butch lesbian. As you can see, they're wearing a suit, they have a masculine haircut. They don't look the way a traditional woman should look because they are rejecting gender roles and presenting masculinely. Gender roles are a set of behaviors and values each gender are expected to have. So in a patriarchy, traditional gender roles are as follows. Men are masculine, powerful, the breadwinner, women are feminine, nurturing, the caregiver. In her 1993 book, Boots of Leather, Slippers of Gold, Elizabeth Kennedy interviewed Butches in the 1950s bar scene. And these Butches stated that they were more dominant or protector of sorts, specifically in a sexual context. And this is because the creation of these identities were used to flag to one another their preferred sexual position. However, that changed, and I'll get into that in a little bit. A femme is very similar to a Butch lesbian, where Butches completely reject traditional gender roles, femmes subvert them. In a 2003 study conducted by Levitt, Garish, and Heistand, femmes stated that they perform femininity for the gaze solely of another woman and reject the male gaze. The male gaze was coined by Laura Mulvey in 1975 in her book Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema. It is the idea that women are to be looked at for the pleasure of the heterosexual man, and Mulvey asserts that this is a characteristic of traditional femininity, and when femmes reject the male gaze, they are subverting traditional femininity. This is Dorothy Allison, a self-identified femme. You can see from the way she is posed, she is not posed to be looked at. She is looking directly into the camera. She looks comfortable on her bike. Whether or not you find this sexy is irrelevant. The way she is posed, you can see she's rejecting being looked at as she is looking directly at you. She's a femme rejecting the male gaze. So now that you understand what Butch and Femme mean, let's look at their evolution through time. It was not uncommon to see Butch-Femme couples in the 1940s and 1950s, especially in the bar scene. According to Nessel in her 1987 book, Butch-Femme Relationships, Sexual Courage in the 1950s, it wasn't uncommon to mistake a femme for a butch, and this is because they both reject traditional gender roles. They're also both very visible. And this visibility came with discrimination from other lesbians at the time. It was not acceptable to be a homosexual in the 1950s. And so being open about it, being visible, you risked exposing other lesbians, or so they were afraid. And you could suffer severe repercussions such as losing your job, losing support from your family. Also, according to Nessel, when you entered a lesbian bar in the 1950s, you were asked if you were butch or you were femme. And this is because they expected you to fit into one of these identities, as it was a flag to indicate to one another your preferred sexual position. However, when they begin to face discrimination from other lesbians, these identities changed. And that discrimination didn't stop there. According to Julie Bindel in her 2015 article in The Guardian, a few decades after the curation of these identities, second-wave feminism was in its prime. And with it, feminists began to criticize butch femme identities as being too patriarchal. They stated that in order to be a feminist and a lesbian, you should present androgynously. This meant that you shouldn't be feminine or masculine, you should reject both. And by being butch and femme, you were too patriarchal and go against their conceived notions of what feminism needed to do. With this rejection from feminists, there was a redefinition and a dying out of butch and femme labels. However, simply by being a lesbian, you just stop patriarchy, and this is because you go against societal expectations of what a woman should do, such as be with a man. So, in the 1980s, as feminism was dying down, there was a resurgence of butch and femme identities, but they were redefined. So, you would no longer use this label to fit into a box. You'd only use it if it fit you. And butches could date butches, femmes could date femmes, and this is because it was no longer a way just to flag sexually. It was a fully fleshed out identity with its own culture and meaning, aside from just sex. Also, because of feminism, femmes became less visible to heterosexuals, and even to people in the LGBT community, because it was expected of lesbians to be, it was expected of women to subvert traditional femininity. And with that came discrimination within the LGBT community. In a 2017 study conducted by Rothbaum, Balsam, and Wickham, femmes felt less acceptance within the LGBT community because of this lack of visibility. So now that you're all caught up on butch and femme identities, let's review. A butch is a lesbian that presents masculinely, and a femme is a lesbian that presents femininely. Both these identities go against traditional patriarchy. They faced discrimination from other lesbians and feminists for being either too visible or too patriarchal. Both of these identities originated as a way to flag to each other their preferred sexual positions, but now they're fully fleshed out identities with their own meaning and own cultures. Butch and femme identities came about in the late 1940s and have been a staple in the lesbian community since then. Understanding past cultures gives us clarity today to understand why we are so diverse. If you leave with anything, let it be this. Don't be afraid of butches and femmes because of their difference. We have a history and a culture of our own that you can appreciate.